Welcome to the fourth session of Shintaro's Start to Finish training. Today, I'll be taking you through all of the things in Shintaro associated with finance, arrears management, and waiting lists. So, in the last session, we had a look at a number of tenancies. First, we created a tenancy for John Lennon, and we tenanted him in a property at Lygon 3. Let's go and have a look at his tenancy record. So we charged John his first fortnight's rent, and we looked at setting up other charges, and we set up a fortnightly furniture charge for $20. At the end of the session, we also set up an arrangement because when John moved in, he accidentally broke a window. What we're going to go straight into now is processing payments. One simple way to process a payment is to enter a transaction manually. We talked about this in the last session where our tenant Eddie Vedder came into our office and gave us $10 in cash towards his arrears. So we usually enter transactions manually when someone pays cash or provides a cheque at the beginning of a tenancy, either from a support agency or a bond authority as an example. To enter a transaction manually, we simply click Enter Transaction here. We would select a rent payment, the date, the amount that's being paid, and add comments, paid in cash. Now, I'm going to send this transaction to the buffer account because this is not how I want to begin John's rent payments. So now that transaction is gone, but we still have the previous rent charge, furniture charge, and tenancy maintenance charge. Let's go back into the home screen. In Shintaro, there are 3 ways that we process and receive payments automatically. We'll begin by having a look at the first and most common way to process payments in Shintaro, which is via CENTERPAY payments. Clients will make a CENTERPAY deduction where it is agreed that a certain amount of their Centrelink is deducted each fortnight, and this gets paid directly into your bank account. CENTERPAY will provide a daily or a weekly file, depending on how you've set this up, and you will download that file from the CENTERPAY website and process it in Shintaro. This may not be something that you do yourself, it might be something that your finance team does, but either way, we're going to cover how this works. Let's pretend that I've been onto the CENTERPAY website and downloaded my files, and they have been saved onto a folder on my network. I can't show you how to do this as I don't have a CENTERPAY account, but we've created some files that are the same as the ones that you will download from the CENTERPAY website. So once we've downloaded these files, we go into our Finance menu, and then into Bank Functions. And the most common form for processing files such as CENTERPAY files, or other files that we'll be having a look at later, is multi-bank processing. This form is set up to import all of the files that we receive from other organisations, banks and CENTERPAY, and import them as payments against our tenancies. On this screen, we can see the steps are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there are 5 steps that we take to do this. The first step is to import the file. So, as I said, I've downloaded the files from CENTERPAY, and now we click this button with the 3 dots, and we go and find our file. So we select the file we wish to import, and in this case, it's the file from the 18th of the 6th, 2015, and we double-click this file. The next step is to select the bank account that we're going to import this into. Here we have a CENTERPAY file, so we'll import this into the CENTERPAY bank account. This is my default, and this may not be on your default. If it isn't, we can choose the option we want from the drop-down list here. So we can go and find CENTERPAY, and we have a lot of bank accounts set up in this demo. You may only have 1, 2 or 3 set up here. The next step is to import the file, and when we click Import, this takes the CHINTARO file and brings it into CHINTARO for us to have a look at first. We always want to have a look at it first before we commit it to the transactions. So this now shows us all of the information in the CHINTARO file. For those of you who are familiar with CHINTARO files, you'll know that there are three types of thing in this file. The first thing is an advice record, which tells us that someone has changed their deduction, initiated a new deduction, or they have finished a deduction. Those ones have no dollar value here as a deduction, but this PYI is information to tell you what's happened. The next thing we have down here are transactions with the dollar amounts in them. Next to that, we have the CRNs and names. And these are the actual CHINTARO payments. So these are the individual deductions for each of the CHINTARO payments that have been set up. The last part of this file is the fees, and this is usually grouped by income types. So we can see here a field for fees, and this is a fee from CHINTARO. We can see we have one for $10, and we can't be sure which fees are tied to which CHINTARO transaction, so we'll basically ignore these. So if we go and have a look at what's happening here, the first transaction or transactions here will be advices. They won't always be there, but if they are there, you'll know that there have been changes to a deduction. In this column, CHINTARO says not a rent payment. So it knows that this is not a payment of rent, so it's not going to do anything with it. This is the same for the other fee down the bottom here. This also says not a rent payment, so it's not going to do anything with this one either. All of these other transactions, we have an amount paid. They all have a CRN and someone's name. And CHINTARO has matched each of these payments with one of our tenants. So if we click on the name, we see a grey box appear, and this is a drop-down box. This will list all of our tenants. So we can see here that Max Weinberg is matched with Max Weinberg in this list, Ernest Carter with Ernest Carter, Clarence Clements with Clarence Clements, and so on. The way CHINTARO matches these is by using the CRN number. The CRN being the unique customer reference number that Centrelink provides, and everybody has their own one, and Centrelink is always right because it's their number. So everyone is matched up here. Over here we have the rent component column, and this tells us how much rent is going to be paid. And then we have the other amount columns telling us how much is going to be paid to other charges. You can see that some of these tenants have splits, and we'll see how this works in a minute when we have a look at the next payment. For the moment, we've now done step 4, where we selected the correct tenancies and marked all records, so they have a tick over here. And now we'll generate the rent payments. So we click on Generate Payments and Transfer to Bank Account. And when we click this button, this will save all of the payments to the appropriate tenancies and transfer them into our bank account permanently. So when we do this, we get the message that pops up saying 28 rent payments, 15 other credits, 0 bond, and 0 property fee transactions generated. All transactions have been copied to the bank account. When it says property fee transactions, we have a parameter in CHINTARO that allows us to charge the cost of the fee to the property ledger. This is not something that we're going to spend a lot of time on, but this could be another cost of the tenancy, such as the 99-cent fee that CENTARO charges, and it cannot be allocated to the tenant. Your organisation may cost these differently, but some people like to put the 99-cent fee as a cost to the property. So let's click on OK. And now that's done. If we were to go into the different tenancies now, we would see the payments in there. What we're going to do now is select the next file, and this file has John Lennon's payment in it. So we start at step 1 again. We go in and find the file. CHINTARO is the correct bank account. And we click on Import to import the file. Here we can see John Lennon's name in our list, and this has been matched up against his tenancy. Now let's have a look and see what would happen if this didn't match up. So what I'm going to do is go into his record and change his CRN to make it wrong so it doesn't match. If we get out of here before we click the Generate button, nothing will happen. So we go out of this screen and into the Client Record screen. And we'll find John Lennon's record. So we see his CRN here, and this matches what was on the CHINTARO file. I'll just change the last letter to B, so this won't match the CHINTARO file. Now we can exit out of this screen, back to the home screen, into Finance, Bank Functions, and then into multi-bank processing again. So we select the file, and that was the 9th of the 7th, 2015. We click on Import, and we can now see that John's payment has not matched up. So we see here that this field is blank, and if you see a blank line in here, you'll know that the CRN is wrong or it's not input. So you'd look at the name, John Lennon, and we know who that tenant is, so we can go and find him and put that CRN into the client record. Because CHINTARO are the keepers of the CRN, so to speak, you'll know that this number is correct. So we highlight this number and click on Control and C to copy. We go back into John's record, highlight the CRN number here, and click on Control V, which is paste. Now, when we go back into Finance, Bank Functions, and Multi-Bank Processing, we select the file and import, and we can see that this matches up with John. So this is how this works. If you find that a name is not in here, the CRN in the client record will be wrong. What we can also see here is that John paid a total of $426.30, and CHINTARO has split that payment into 3 separate payments. One for rent, one in other amount 1, and then a second in other amount 2. And we don't know what these are, and we can't tell from here. If we go and have a look at John's tenancy record before we input this, we'll have a look at how we set this up. So we looked at this at the end of the last session, but we'll go in now and have a look at why it's doing this. So in the last session, we had a look at the payment arrangements screen. So here we've said that we're going to split John's payment to include a $20 furniture payment per fortnight and a $10 maintenance payment per fortnight for the broken window. And these are in addition to the payment for his rent, which is going to be $396.30 a fortnight. So this is why the extra payments are made. Now let's have a look at a better way to process this form and manage it. If you're doing a lot of these payment splits or arrangements, the better form to use to import the bank account or CHINTARO file is the Multi-Bank Processing 2-line screen. So let's click on that. And this all looks the same. But when we import the file, we can see that we have 2 lines for each payment. You can see that in John's line here, there is still the rent component for $396.30. In the other amount 1, we can see there is an amount for $20, and underneath this, we see what the $20 is for. And in this case, it's for a furniture payment. Then, next to this, we have the $10 for the tenant maintenance payment. So this is what we set up from the payment arrangement screen. This multi-split two-line form works in exactly the same way as the one-line form. If you're not doing payment splits, just use the one-line form because you'll be able to see more on the screen. If you do have a lot of splits, you may want to check the payments before you commit them, so use the two-line form. We'll use the two-line screen because we have a few splits in here. So all of our payments are matched and correct, and what we would do now is generate the payments and transfer to bank accounts so all of these payments will be made, but if we needed to, we could change these payments. We could say we wanted to make the tenant maintenance payment $5 instead of $10 and make the furniture payment $25 instead of $20. As long as all of these amounts add up in total, then this is okay. If we tried to add money onto another charge, let's say $30 here, when we click elsewhere on the screen, the system will tell us that the total of all amounts does not equal the transaction amount. Update cancelled. So let's get rid of the $30 we put in, and we'll go back and put John's charges as they were. The furniture payment for $20 and the tenant maintenance payment of $10. And the point of this being, we can tweak these amounts if we need to. If we saw a strange amount come in and we needed to amend it, we can do so before we generate the payments. All we need to do now is generate the payments and transfer to bank account. And we get the message that 10 rent payments, 8 other credits, 0 bond and 0 property fee transactions generated. And let's go and see how this has affected John's tenancy. So we go into the tenancy search screen and find John. We can see in his tenancy transactions that he's made a rent payment of $396.30, a furniture payment of $20, and a tenant maintenance payment of $10. So this is pretty straightforward. John's balance is now $40 in debit because he's still paying off the broken window, which was originally $50, but he's now started to pay us back and he's paid $10 towards that. So we can look at the ledger for only rent charges, and we can see that his balance in rent is 0. He's paid up to date. But we can also look at non-rent charges. And he still owes us $40, which he will be paying through his arrangement in his upcoming CHINTARO payments. Now, let's go back into the bank submenu. If we aren't sure about what we've done, or if we want to go in and have a look at what we've done with these payments, we can use either of these two options to view bank accounts. When we processed each of these files, all of those transactions were saved into a bank account, as well as onto the individual ledgers. So if we click on View Bank Accounts, this form is like the other one, but it doesn't give us the option to import a file. This has now got all of the payments that we have processed. All of the CHINTARO files have been imported. So the most recent import is up the top, and if we scroll down, we see all of the payments that we have processed. So if you want to go and make sure that you've processed a file, or you want to have a look at the detail of what's happened, you can look in these forms. This is the same as the View Bank Account 2 lines, but again, this one has splits. So if you're trying to work out where something has gone wrong with a split, you will look at this form. Normally, all of the CHINTARO ones will be allocated because it's pretty hard not to match up a CHINTARO payment because you have the tenant's name and the CRN on the advice. This could be different when you're trying to match up payments through the bank. So most organisations will have some tenants who pay via their bank account. So let's see how that works. Firstly, you'll go to the bank website and download the statement for the period, say for the day or week, or however you run your banking, and you'll download the file as a CSV file. You'll then save it somewhere on the network using the same concept we had with the CENTERPAY file, but it's going to be a different file format. Let's say I've downloaded the file from the bank and we're going to import it now. So to do this, we use exactly the same forms, multi-bank processing or multi-bank processing to-line. In this example, we'll select multi-bank processing. The first thing we do is select the file, and this one's called CSV Bank 20150713. The next thing we do is select the bank account. This is not a CENTERPAY file, and if we click Import Now, we get an error message. There are no records to process in this file because this file format is not a CENTERPAY file format. Most banks have their own formats, so you'll need to choose the bank account that you have downloaded this from. I'm going to choose Generic CSV. All of the banks and building societies that we know of in Australia and New Zealand are in these lists, so you should be able to choose the right one to import properly. If you can't, you should contact support straight away so we can help you set this up. So we import the file, and you'll see that this is quite a smaller file than the CENTERPAY file because most of our tenants pay via CENTERPAY, but it's very much the same and works in the same way. We have the date of the transaction on the left, the amounts next to this, and the payment book ID or reference numbers here. Depending on your bank, you may have more information here, but you'll generally have the payer's name and the address or a reference number you've provided to help the system match up the payments. You'll see over here that most of these payments have been matched up, but we have one payment here that hasn't matched up, and we'll need to do some investigation to find out who this belongs to. We can see the name, but we may only see the payment book ID, so we need to find out who that would be for. Notice also that just like on the CENTERPAY file with fees, there is one transaction here that automatically says not a rent payment. These are things like payments or debits from our account, which will show as a minus amount, and this will automatically know that this is not a rent payment because this is money going out of our account and is not money coming in. In your bank account, you'll have bulk CENTERPAY amounts that have things like FAO and CENTERPAY on them, and CHINTARO will automatically say this is not a rent payment either, because even though it's money coming in from the account from CENTERPAY, we've already processed those payments by using the CENTERPAY file, so we don't want to process them again as rent payments. So from that point of view, CHINTARO will ignore these as rent payments. For the fields without a name match, if we know who the payment book ID or name of the tenant was, we could then drop down this list and go and find the name of the tenant and allocate that payment to somebody. If we don't have time to go and find the name of the tenant, we can leave these unallocated and process the payments. If I do that by generating the payments and transferring to bank account, we get the message that 2 rent payments, 0 other credits, 0 bond, and 0 property fee transactions generated. All transactions have been copied to the bank account. So what I've done there is I've processed all of the payments for those that were able to be matched up, and for the ones that haven't matched up, I've left them sitting unallocated. So now we have the money, but we haven't put the unallocated transaction on anyone's tenancy ledger. This is because at the time, we're assuming that we were unsure who the payment was for. This is going to have to be something you resolve, and there will be different ways that you can do this. There may be someone in arrears, and they'll tell you that they've paid, and you'll need to find out where that payment was. So at some stage, you'll want to add that unallocated payment to the tenancy. We can do this through the View Bank Accounts screen. If we go back into View Bank Accounts and choose the generic CSV file, these are the payments that we made today, 13th of the 7th, 2015, and we can see this one here is unallocated. So once we've gone through and found out who the tenancy is, we can find that person, Jeremy Finer, and once we choose someone in here, we get a little tick in the Generate Credit box over here. And all this means is that Generate Payments is going to create a transaction for Jeremy Finer, no one else, just the one I have the tick box for. So let's generate payments, and we get this message. 1 rent payment, 0 other credits, 0 bond, and 0 property fee transactions generated. All transactions have been copied to the bank account. So now Jeremy has this payment on his tenancy. If we wanted to just see unallocated transactions here, we could use the filter box to just choose unallocated. So you should be regularly checking this to ensure you aren't missing any unallocated payments. And if you do have the unallocated payments, it's best to investigate them and find out who is paying the money and why it's not going onto the tenancy, because this is going to affect your arrears, arrangements, and other things. So this is how we import bank and CHINTARO files. Now, we only have 2 or 3 tenancies that pay via their bank account, and it's hardly worth going to the bank website to download the CSV file and import them. Or maybe our finance team prints out the statements and hands them to you on a piece of paper. We have the ability to enter in transactions manually, and we do this by going into the manual bank processing screen. So this screen is similar to other screens, except you can enter in amounts. First, you'll select the bank account you're processing to, and we'll select the generic CSV file. Now, let's say that I have a statement in front of me, and it has payments totaling $758.18 on it. We would enter that figure in here, and we have no debits, so we leave this as 0. Then we can put the date of the transaction in here, and we'll put it as today's date. The first payment amount is $84.12, and in the description, we'll put in what is on the statement, so we will put in Jeremy Finer. When we click in the tenancy field, we have a drop-down list to select the tenancy that we're going to match this transaction with, and we'll select Jeremy Finer. Notice in this drop-down list that we have 3 columns. We have the name, the payment book ID, and the date that the tenant vacated. So we can see that we have 2 tenancies for Jeremy, one of which he vacated on the 10th of the 7th, 2015. So we want the payment to go on the current tenancy, so we will select the tenancy with no end date. This assumes that the rent will be the whole amount, and if we wanted to split this into, say, a rent of $80 and $4.12 for a tenancy maintenance payment, we would select the other type of charge from this drop-down list here, but we're not going to do this for this payment. Then we just keep going to add another line with the same date, the amount of $276.66. Description will be the name, and this is for Andrew Rankin. And then we select Andrew's name from this list. Then we can continue to add more lines for the payments we wish to process. When we are ready, we click Generate Payments and Transfer to Bank Account. Then we get the message that 3 rent payments, 0 other credits, 0 bond, and 0 property fee transactions generated. All transactions have been copied to the bank account. And this works in exactly the same way if we had imported the file. In this example, we've doubled up on these payments, and we'll have a look at what this means later on in the session. So this screen is only used for low volumes where we only have to enter in 1 or 2 transactions instead of having to go onto the bank website, downloading the file, etc., Or if you do not have permission to go to the bank website and download the file, and you are happy to get finance to download it for you, they might just give you a statement, and in that case, you will use this to import all of the payments. The advantage of doing it through this screen as opposed to entering it individually onto each of the tenancies is that you get a record as a bank account that we can view via the bank account screen. When we choose the generic CSV from the Select Bank Account list, the payments that we just entered show as payments from the bank account. So the two most common forms of payment are processing CHINTARO files and processing bank files and inputting bank statements. There is a third type of automated payment that CHINTARO supports, and this is direct debit processing. Many of you will not use it, but direct debit in CHINTARO is not where a client sets up an EFT or electronic funds transfer that is automatically transferred to you. It's where you actually debit their file. So you create a file, upload it to the bank, and then the bank will take the money out of their file if there is a balance there. There are a handful of our clients that use this, and it's primarily used in aged care, and it's where you really want to make sure that your tenants have money in their bank. If they don't, you'll get hit with a fee, and the fee will differ depending on your bank. It may be $60 or $100 or something like that. So it's a risky process if your tenants are on low incomes. If they're on more secure incomes or they're retired and they are in an aged care facility, you might use this. So when we click on direct debit processing, we can see these debits set up here. We have set up 3 debits here for David, Betty, and Bruce. And before we have a look at this form in detail, we're going to have a look at one of their tenancies. So in David Beckham's tenancy, at the top of the screen in the tenancy functions, we can see a button for direct debit details. If we click on this, the middle of the screen changes, and this is where we put in the information for the direct debit for David. We have a last process date, and we haven't got one in there yet because we haven't processed any payments. We have a next process date, and this is today. We have the debit frequency, which is fortnightly. And there are his bank details, the BSB and account number, the debit amount of $397.44, and whether this is an active debit or not. Active means that it is currently used, and if this is unticked, it means that we don't want to direct debit him the next time we create the direct debit file. So this is why he appears on the list for direct debit processing. Let's go back to our processing screen now. The first thing we do on this screen is to choose a date that the direct debit is for, and this will be today's date. This is the date that the payment will be made. Next, we have where the file is going to be saved. So this is going to create a file that we upload to the bank, and we can go in and choose where we want it to be saved. I will choose to save this file on the desktop as an example. Then we need to select which bank account is going to receive this file because they have different formats again. So we'll say that this is going to go to the NAB, and then we can select the clients that we want to generate the payment for. Most of you won't be using the screen, but I'll quickly run you through what these fields are for. So we have the BSB number and the last process date here, and this is the date that we last processed the direct debit payment. Then we have when the next process of the direct debit is due, the account number, the amount we're going to be processing, and the current rent. The compare box here just says, is the amount we are processing enough to pay the current rent? And one of these boxes is not ticked, so it would be something that you would go and have a look at before you create the file. You might need to speak to Bruce and say, we're going to increase your direct debit to $320 a fortnight, so let's go and do that. We go back into the tenancy search screen and find Bruce. We then go into the direct debit details and we change the amount to $320. Now, when we go back into the direct debit processing screen, we can see that compare box is now ticked. So now we can select the tenants we wish to generate the direct debit for. If we would like to select all tenants, we can do so by clicking the function at the top here. And we can select none to deselect all. We could also manually select which tenants we would like by ticking their boxes here. Once we are happy with this, we can click Generate at the top here, and this will create the file. So this creates a file on my desktop where I chose to save it, and this is an XML format. It might not make a lot of sense to us, but when this is uploaded to the NAB bank, it will have all of the information that they need to create those payments. So those payments have now been saved as rent payments in the tenancy. If we go in and have a look at David Beckham's tenancy, this has become a payment automatically, even though we haven't even got it in our bank account yet. Organisations that use direct debit processing in CHINTARO find this easier because they are confident that their payments are going to be honoured, and if they're not, they'll do a reversal. But 99% of their payments will be honoured because they are in aged care or there is a reliable amount in the bank. So this is direct debit processing, and most of you will never use this, but it opens up the possibility of you being able to use it. The next thing we'll look at is how to fix problems. One of the things that happens reasonably regularly is that the same file will be imported twice. So let's go back into Finance, Bank Functions, and Multi-Bank Processing, and we'll import the same file that we've already processed. So when we select the file and the bank account, and we click Import, we get this warning that says transactions already exist in the bank account for the file that you're importing. It may be a duplicate. Press OK to continue or cancel to quit. Even though we've been warned, we still might say OK, and this does happen from time to time, where the file you're importing may not be a duplicate because you'll have some transactions that were in yesterday and also in today with the same date. So let's click on OK. And we have all of our files with the payments, and we will generate these payments. And we've now generated the 28 payments. Before, we also imported a CSV file for 3 of our tenants, but we also manually entered their transactions in. So let's go and have a look at Fred Mockingbird. And we can see here that there are 2 payments of $397.40, which are exactly the same payments, and we have a problem here. We have given those 3 tenants an extra payment, and we have processed the CentrePay file twice, and we want to do something about this. So let's go back and have a look at our bank account in View Bank Accounts. We'll choose Generic CSV, and we can see that those payments are in here twice. If we go to the CentrePay bank account, we can see the duplicates in here also. So what we want to do is reverse one of those batches out. To do this, we go back to the previous menu, and we use the Batch Maintenance option down here. If we have a look at this, this will show us all of the files in the batches that we have imported with CHINTARO. So we can see here that we have a CentrePay file from the 13th of the 7th, 2015, and the transactions are from the 18th of the 6th, 2015. We can also see the number of records that were entered and who did it. We can see in this list that we've already imported the file from this date, as we can see this here. So basically, the one that is wrong is the top one. The top entry here is the one I imported second, so I want to select this row by clicking here, and we click on Delete Batch here. all this is going to do is undo everything I did when I imported the second time. So I click on Delete Batch and click Yes, and now that's gone. So this works in the same way for bank and CenterPay files. Let's do the same for the second generic CSV because these are our manual transactions. Now, if we go back into Fred Mockingbird's tenancy, we can see that that duplicate payment is now gone. If we went into all of the tenancies, we would see that those duplicates are gone also. There were 2 payments, and now there's 1. Let's go back to the home screen. The next thing we're going to have a look at is the Centrelink Income Confirmation Service. There are a few ways to do the Centrelink Income Confirmation Service. Sometimes you'll go onto the CenterPay Business portal and you'll look up a tenant's income details screen on that screen, or download the income statement for them individually. There is another service that Centrelink provide, and this is a batch income confirmation service. The way this works is if you upload all of your tenants' details and send the file to CenterPay by uploading a file to the website, they will send you back a file that has all of the income details in it, and CHINTARO will import that. I'll show you a bit about how this works, but I can't show you how to do it from start to finish because I can't upload a file to CenterPay and have them send one back to me because we don't have a test facility to do this. So from the home screen, we go into Finance, and then we go into Centrelink Functions. Here we can see a number of functions for CCES, and this means Centrelink Confirmation e-Services. This used to be ICS, which was the Income Confirmation Service, but this has recently changed names. The first option is to export XML incomes, and this means export from CHINTARO or create a file from CHINTARO that has got everyone's income requests in it. So this is going to create a request from the Centrelink Confirmation e-Service to ask if we can have all of the income details for the clients. So when we click on this, we can see a list of clients in here. This is not all of our clients, it's just some of them, because in order for them to be on this list, 4 things have to be done for these clients. So let's have a look at a client record and see what these things are. The client must be an active tenant. We must have a date of birth entered into CHINTARO. We have to have their CRN entered in the income details section of the client record. And we need to have this box ticked to have permission to use the Centrelink Income Authority service. So let's have a look at another client now. So David Beckham was not in our list and we need to find out why. When we open up his client record, we can see that we do have a date of birth in CHINTARO, and the date of birth just helps CenterPay make sure that this is the right person that they are providing the income details for. He is an active tenant because this box says View Tenancy, but in the income details, we don't have a CRN and the Centrelink Income Authority box is not ticked. So let's say that we have permission from David to use the Centrelink Confirmation e-Service and we have been given his CRN. We put his CRN in here, and to the right of this, we have a box here that indicates that we do have permission to download his income. We can also see our permissions and confirmations for our client using the confirmations function at the top here. So if we click on the confirmed button, we can see that there are some tick boxes here for confirmations and consent. In here we have the Centrelink Income Authority box, and this is not ticked, so we now have consent and we can tick this box. And when we go back to the income details screen, we can see that that box in here is ticked also. So we've made sure that all of these 4 parameters are entered and they are correct. We can now go back to our home screen. into Finance, Centrelink Functions, and into CCES Export XML Incomes. And now we can see David Beckham on this list. If you are using the Centrelink Income Confirmation service, you'll need to make sure that all of your tenants are on here. So let's select all. Now let's have a look at the rest of this form. The values up here are given to you by Centrelink, and we have the CCES user ID, and this is the same user ID which you will use to log on to CenterPay with. It won't be like mine that says Anna, and you will know what user ID to enter if you use this service. Then we have a 3-letter agency ID, and we have this as MDB. And then you have your agency's CRN. So these 3 things must be in the file, and then we need to say where we're going to save the file. So we can go in and change the file destination, and we now want to save this onto the desktop. So then we click Export, and this has created a file on my desktop, and this is the file that we need to send to Centrelink. So then I'm going to upload that file to the Centrelink portal, and they're going to send us another file back. When we have that file, we're going to save it somewhere, and then I'm going to go into another form. The Centrelink Confirmation e-service, Import XML Incomes. We select the file and import, and we will see all of the Centrelink incomes for all of the people that we selected. For all of the people on that list, when we go into that client screen, their incomes will be correct in the income section, as well as the correct rates of assessment, so any incomes that they have will now be reflected in the client record. So this will save you manually entering in those incomes, and you can run this as often as you like. Often this will be done before a rent review, but you could do this weekly if you wanted to ensure that everybody's income details are up to date. So we're going to leave the payment side of things there, and now we're going to have a look at arrears and arrears management. One of the key things in running a social housing organisation is making sure that your tenants are paying their rent and keeping your arrears as manageable as you can as an organisation. This will vary depending on the type of program you're providing and the type of tenants that you have. Generally, arrears is an issue in most CHINTARO organisations, so let's have a look and see how we manage arrears in CHINTARO. From the home screen, we go into Tenancies, because arrears are linked with tenancies, and then we go into Arrears Management. If we click on this, we get a list of all of the tenants who are in arrears. Depending on how many tenants you have in arrears, this list will continue to keep scrolling down. The idea of this screen is supposed to be a working screen for you to look at the information on the screen, take actions, and even create arrears actions. So let's have a look at what's on this screen and why. At the top, we have a drop-down list for select action to take, and we will have a look at this in just a moment. Then we have a list of all of our tenants. We see the Include box, their name, property name and room number if they have one, and Tenancy Manager. Then we see how much they are in arrears, and the number of days they have been in arrears. We then see what the last arrears action that was taken was. Arrears actions are designed to be regular policy that your organisation takes in arrears management. We'll talk about this in just a moment. Next, in the tenancy status, we can see that our list has defaulted to active arrears. If we wanted to show all clients with active arrears and vacated arrears, we would click on the black funnel icon in tenancy status and select vacated arrears as well as active arrears. If we wanted to view the active arrears without the vacated arrears, we click on the funnel icon again, and we will select only active arrears. Next, we can see the last payment date, the amount that was paid, the date that the rent has been charged to, the date that the tenant has been in arrears since, their contact phone number, and the program in the organisation that they are part of. If we wanted to see what's happening in the tenancy screen, we can double-click on the client's name and be taken directly to that screen. So we can see here that Paul Cook has been making regular payments of both rent and furniture payments for some time, and we might leave this tenancy for now. Let's go and have a look at another tenant with arrears now. So we will have a look at Glenn Matlock's tenancy. We can see that Glenn is paying $400 of rent every fortnight, plus he has a furniture charge and a utilities charge. By looking at his tenancy transactions, we can see that he was paying his other charges, but they seem to have stopped being paid around the 23rd of the 4th. So we'll want to make contact with Glenn to find out why he has ceased paying for these other charges. So we go back to the arrears management screen, and the arrears actions that your organisation takes might be a 5-step process, it might be a 3-step process. Your first step might be to call the tenant and ask them why, and then remind them to make an extra payment, and this might be all you do for now. Let's say you made the phone call, the tenant didn't return any of your phone calls, and they aren't paying. The second thing you might do is send them a letter. It might be that you send them a letter as soon as they are in arrears, telling them that they are in arrears and they have 14 days to remedy this. This may be a standard form or a letter within your organisation that you use as a polite letter saying, "You missed a rent payment, please pay as soon as possible." The next step might be a second arrears letter, which is a bit more stern, saying, "Please settle this amount immediately or contact your tenancy manager or you may face eviction." If we still hadn't made contact with the tenant after we made a phone call to them, sent them 2 letters and they're still not paying, the next step in the process may be to issue a breach notice to our tenant and advise them they are in breach of the agreement and they have a certain amount of time to resolve it. The next arrears action after this may be a notice to vacate, which will be a letter sent to them advising them that they are to vacate the premises. The step after this may be a tribunal hearing. So this may be a structured process that your organisation has set up, but you will find out what your organisation's policy is. You can track these specific actions in CHINTARO, and we use this column to record what actions have been taken. So let's say that we've called everybody at the property at the Challenger Surfboard factory about their arrears. Let's filter our search to only show this property by right-clicking on any entry with Challenger Surfboard factory and selecting equals Challenger Surfboard factory. And we have 5 tenants here that we have called regarding their arrears, and we want to record that we have done this. So first, we will select their records by clicking on the include box here. We could also click select all if we wanted to select all clients. Notice that up the top here it now says 5 tenants selected, and this will reflect the number of tenants that you have selected down here. So we can record an action in bulk by selecting the action to take from this drop-down list here. So we will select telephone call. Then there is a button up here that says update arrears history. When we click this, we get a message. 5 records added to arrears action history successful. Then when we click show all, we can see that the telephone call has been added to the last arrears action here. And if we double click on the record, we can see a new arrears action here. And CHINTARO has added a new note into the notes section that says on today's date, there was a telephone call about the arrears to the tenant. And if we open that note up, we can see in the note body added from arrears management. We could then add more text in here if you would like to add more detail about what was said in the telephone call. Now let's go back to the arrears management screen. So the telephone call is pretty simple. Let's have a look at the next arrears action in our list, and this is the first arrears letter. So when we drop this list down, one of these options is the first arrears letter. When we select the first arrears letter, this button has now changed to Create Word Merge. We looked at word merges last sessions when we looked at clients and tenancies, and we use word merges to create letters and documents that we need to in the arrears process. So now we want to filter our search to show all tenants except those at the Challenger Surfboard Factory who have already had a phone call. So we right-click on Challenger Surfboard Factory and select Does Not Equal Challenger Surfboard Factory. Then we right-click on any entry with phone call and select Equals Telephone Call. Here we can see that we have the tenants who have already had a telephone call, and now we want to send them their first arrears letter. So we can select all clients by clicking the Select All button, or we can click them individually in the Include box. And then we click Create Word Merge. Microsoft Word will then open this up, and here we can see the first arrears letter. The first letter is to Don Walker, and this letter details how many days the tenant is in arrears, 77 in Don's case, with the amount that is overdue, $3,080. It also says this amount includes rent which is required to be paid 1 week in advance. Please contact before next Wednesday regarding this issue. You will word these letters however you wish to, depending on what your policy is. If we scroll down, we can see another letter here with their details, and so on. We could then print these letters out or deliver them or post them, and then this process is done. We won't save these letters. Then, when we click Show All, we can see that CHINTARO has been updated with the last arrears action, and if we double click on a record, we can see that in the arrears action box that we have a new arrears action in here. Today for an arrears letter, and previously we had a telephone call, and we can see that the note has been created on today's date. It was an arrears action, and we can see the details of that letter in the note. So let's say that we've got to the point where we need to send a breach notice to one of our tenants. Let's have a look at Peter Garrett's tenancy record. So we can see that Peter has not paid us for the furniture charge or utilities charge throughout the course of his tenancy. We've called him with no response, sent 2 arrears letters, and now we want to send him a breach notice. So back to the arrears management screen, we select breach notice from our arrears action to take. We select the client and click Create Word Merge. So this may be a form that you use where the information in the form is populated from CHINTARO. Now let's have a look at a standard form. In our list, we'll choose NTV or Notice to Vacate. So Roger Daltrey hasn't responded to our contact, and we select Roger as the tenant and create Word Merge. So this form is provided and it's populated with the information from CHINTARO. So depending on what state you're in and the programs that you're running, there'll be standard forms that you will use to produce these forms in CHINTARO. Many of these forms are available to download from the CHINTARO website, and if you don't have these forms set up, you can use the Word Merge guide on the website to help you set these up, or you can always contact support if you need additional help to set these up. If you do want to set up your own Word Merge documents, there's plenty of support to assist you in this process. Most of the available forms in your state are on the website, and we can help you get these set up. So back in our arrears management screen, in our drop-down list, these are all of the arrears actions that I have set up here. Not all of these actions are word merge documents. Remember, we had the telephone call to the client, which does not create a document. So let's go and have a quick look at how to set these up. This might not be something that you do, but it may be something that your system administrator or someone else in the organisation does. Either way, I'll briefly show you how to set these up. So from the home screen, we go into System Maintenance and Reference Tables. This is where all of the drop-down lists are kept in CHINTARO. So we find Arrears Action, and don't worry about these first two columns, they're just numbers for the system. The next column is what appears in our drop-down list, and these are names that we saw in our list. The next column is the template name, and this is what we use to create the letter. These are the files that are in the CHINTARO templates folder. The next column just indicates if it's a word merge or not, and we can see that the client visit and telephone call are not word merges. But all other ones that have a template name and this word merge box ticked are the letters that we use to create the word merge actions. The final column is the active column, and this is where we can select or deselect the word merges to indicate if we want to use them or not. If the box is ticked, we will see them in our list. Going hand in hand with arrears management, there are arrears reports. Sometimes you'll want to work from paper or print a report, and if we go back to the main menu and then into Reports and Exports, into Reports and Tenancies, we can see a number of reports. Here we have a rent in arrears report and a rent in arrears rent transaction only report, non-rent transactions only, and various other formats. If we click on the rent in arrears and preview this report, it's very similar to the screen that we just had. It's got most of the information from the arrears actions screen, and it also has the last 5 arrears actions and last 5 notes on it. So this will enable you to see what's happening with each particular arrears case. One last thing that we will talk about with arrears is arrangements. Arrangements in CHINTARO are when we organise for money to be paid back over a set period of time with a tenant. You may or may not use arrangements depending on if you use payments and splits or not, but if you do use arrangements, we can view all tenant arrangements through the Arrangements screen. We go into the Tenancy menu and then into Arrangements. When we click on this, we get a warning. Arrangements may take some time to run. Do you want to proceed? In the test data that we're looking at, it doesn't take that long, so we will click Yes. If you have a lot of clients and tenancies, this screen might take quite a while to load. On this screen, we can see for each tenant it will tell us how much the payment splits, what they're for, and most importantly, it shows the arrangement status. We can see here that Jack White has a utilities payment, a tenant maintenance payment, and a garden payment, and these are up to date. This means he's making payments as agreed, and these are up to date. Occasionally, you'll find someone has missed their payment, and you can see that Stephen Presswich has missed an additional payment. We can see that Philip Chevron has missed payments. And we can see that Sid Vicious agreed to pay us a fortnightly amount of $20, and he has broken this arrangement. So we might want to call Sid and find out what's happening here. So when a tenant has an arrangement and this is broken, we see this in red. From this screen, you can view the tenancy by double-clicking on the name of the tenant. If you're using payment and arrangement splits, you may want to use this screen to help you keep track of where your tenants are. So this is all we're going to look at with arrangements, and the next thing we're going to look at is waiting lists. Some of you will be using standard waiting lists in your state, meaning when you have a vacancy, you will be given someone who is going into that property and you won't be using waiting lists in CHINTARO. Some of you will be using your own internal waiting list in CHINTARO, and we'll have a look at this now. So when someone applies for housing, we're going to enter them in as a client. In the first session, we talked about how clients don't have to be tenants. They could be people hoping to be tenants, but when you first come into contact with them, they will be clients. So I have entered in a new client last week who is waiting for housing, and his name is George Harrison. If we go into the client screen and find George, we double-click to open his record. He's not currently a tenant, and from this screen I can tell this because this button here says Create Tenancy instead of View Tenancy. But I'm not ready to create a tenancy for him because I don't have a suitable tenancy for him right now. What I will do is add him to our waiting list. So once we've created a client record, we click the button up here for Waiting List. We get this message here that says you are about to create a waiting list entry. Do you want to do this? And we will say yes. So we get the empty waiting list screen. This is a very simple screen, much more simple than the client or tenancy screens, and we have a number of fields on the left here that have been populated with information from the client record. So the first thing we have on this screen are waitlist type 1, waitlist type 2, waitlist type 3, and waitlist type 4. These waiting list types are the ways that you might classify your waiting lists. Usually, people will have some kind of factors of importance that enable you to work out which person on your waiting list is going to be suitable for a property that becomes available. In this example, we're going to use waiting list type 1 as the regions we have housing. So George Harrison is looking to live in St Kilda. Waitlist type 2 is a preferred type of housing, and for George, we will select a unit. Waitlist type 3 is the number of bedrooms that the client is looking for, and George is a single person, so he'll only need one bedroom. We haven't entered anything into waiting list type 4 because waiting list type 1, 2 and 3 are all we need in this example, but you can set these waitlist types up to be whatever suits your organisation, and these are completely customisable through system maintenance and reference tables. So these just help your organisation work out who is most suitable for a property, and you may not use these. You may have a first in best dressed approach, and in that case, you won't need these. George is looking for one of our particular programs and he's looking for a men's housing program, so we can select men's housing. If we don't have different streams, we'll just leave the program field blank. What sort of household type is George? He is a single male aged. The current housing type may be something you want to enter to determine his need, and he is currently in crisis accommodation. He might be living in his car, couch surfing, in a private rental he can no longer afford, and all of these drop-down lists again are customisable. We can put in a referral here to say who he was referred by, and CHINTARO has populated this field with the accommodation service that has come through from the client record. The housing outcome field is a field that we will be using when we take him off the waiting list, so at the moment we won't put anything in here, but these are the different types of outcomes that we can have for a waiting list entry. Current rent is what the client is currently paying in rent each week, and this can help you determine if the client can afford the housing when it becomes available. Application date is the 7th of the 7th, 2015. And the date of last contact is the 7th of the 7th, 2015 also. Preference 1, Preference 2, and Preference 3 gives us an ability to select what the client's preferences are for housing, and we've got preferences of bedrooms set up here. So George is a single with no dependents, so we will just choose one bedroom in Preference 1. You can put whatever you like in these preferences. Number in household will be 1. If George was a current tenant and he was in crisis accommodation, for example, and we want to tenant him in transitional housing and he is awaiting a transfer, we would tick the transfer box. George is not currently housed with us, so we won't select the awaiting transfer box. Residency points can be used if you have a priority system for giving preference to housing local residents. Public housing registered is where we indicate if the client is registered with public housing, as is the department eligible box. George is not registered with public housing, but if he was, we would put his public housing waiting list number in here. If you fill these out on the client record, these will appear here on the waiting list record. His contact phone number has come through from the client record, and if we had entered an email address for him, that would come through from the client record also. Comments is where you can add any comments from the application form or any other comments you wish to make. Client comments would show the comments from the client screen if he had any. George doesn't, so this is blank. So this is all we need to do for a waiting list entry. To the right of the information we just added, we have the note that has come through from the client record. And above this, we have a number of functions at the top here also. We can see George's housing history from his client record by clicking Housing History here. And we can also change any of these fields, and these will change for the client record also. You can use these fields if they are relevant to your organisation, and these are not often used, so that's why these functions are up here. We can SMS, email, or word merge George by clicking any of these functions. Residency links will come through if we've entered these in the client record, and we can also enter these in here. Disability modifications required is a form of tag that we can select for George, and we'll say that he requires a shower rail. Client details will take us back to his client record, and create tenancy will begin the process of creating a tenancy for George. Let's click on client details now. So you can see in yellow here that it indicates that now George Harrison is waitlisted. Let's say that he's just informed us that he is registered for the public housing waiting list. So let's tick this box and enter a number in here. Now when we click on waiting list, we can see that that number has come through. Back in the client screen, let's say that George has called us to ask how his application is going. So we can quickly add a note from today's date as a phone call, and the title will be Housing Inquiry. We'll type the comments in here. George called to see if there are any vacancies. When we click Add, we get this little pop-up that asks, do you want to update the last contact date on the waiting list? And we will say yes. This keeps the date of last contact up to date. So whenever you add a note for a client on a waiting list, you can keep the date of last contact recorded. We keep this because some organisations who run waiting lists have a policy whereby the client must contact the organisation regularly, and if they don't, they'll be removed from the waiting list. So now we have George on the waiting list, and we're able to jump straight to the waiting list from our quick links up the top here. If we click on waiting list, we see a fairly straightforward search screen. We have the clients on the waiting list here, and we can see their names, waiting list type, preferences, if the client is DHS registered or not, the program, application date, date of last contact, and other fields. If we wanted to view a waiting list record, we would double-click and open it up. Back in the waiting list search screen, we have a number of functions at the top here where we can SMS, email, and word merge waiting list clients, and we have the ability to delist a client if they need to be removed from the waiting list. Clicking Show All will show all clients if we have put a filter on, and we can print the waiting list by clicking Print, and if we click Export, we'll export the data to Microsoft Excel. Now, let's say that we have a property that has just become available and we would like to tenant George Harrison in that property. We double-click on his record from the waiting list screen, and then we click Create Tenancy, and this is the same button as if we pressed it on the client record. So we get this message, "You're about to create a tenancy. Do you want to do this?" And we will say yes. Then we get the empty tenancy screen. We'll go through this quite quickly because we covered it in a previous session, but first we will select the room, and we will tenant George in room 7 at the Challenger Surfboard Factory. In the rent record, we'll put the start date as today, and we have calculated George's rent to be $138.33 a week. The tenancy start date is today, and the rent will be charged to the 12th of the 7th, 2015. Now, when we click Activate, it says this client has an active waiting list entry. Do you want to remove this waiting list entry? And yes, we do. Now George has a tenancy. If we go back to the waiting list screen and click Show All, George has gone from there. If we go into the tenancy screen, we can see that George is a tenant. From the home screen, we can see a waiting list sub-menu. If we click on this, we see 4 options. Manage waiting list will take us to the waiting list screen. Waiting list letters are where we are able to send bulk word merges to clients on the waiting list. Waiting list email is where we can send bulk emails to clients on the waiting list. And waiting list SMS is where you can send bulk SMSs to clients on the waiting list. So this is all we're going to cover for waiting lists. So now we've covered what you need to know about the finance and waiting list functions in CHINTARO. If you've missed anything or want to recap on a certain section of the screen without watching the whole video again, please have a look at the e-learning videos on the CHINTARO website, www.chintaro.com.au, where you will be able to refresh your memory on each section of this screen. The e-learning videos are up to 15 minutes in length and cover everything I've shown you today. In the next session, we'll cover property maintenance, system maintenance, and reports and exports.